So we're going to add a UI to our fantasy level. It's going to be a pretty quick video. There's only 4 sections and they're relatively quick. We're going to go over how we can create our UI canvas and use some nice fonts and some backgrounds to create an appealing message. We're going to make a UI manager script that shares in the singleton approach so that we get a UI manager that persists between scene loads. We're going to see how we can turn off UI messages on and off for the player. And we're going to make sure that messages are hidden when they should be hidden. All right, so why don't we just get started? I'll bring this over here. We're going to get started by creating our canvas. Your canvas is basically like your UI graphics in your scene. So I'm going to make sure I'm in my first scene here. I'm going to make my game view a little bit smaller. I'm in my first scene of my project where my GM is nestled. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, go to UI, and create canvas. And Unity creates a canvas for us and an event system. Both of these components are needed in the scene for our UI to work. But this is a little messy. It's a little floaty out in there. So I'm going to create an empty game object, and we're going to call this UI Manager. And I'm going to nestle these two UI related things under it. And I'm going to go ahead and just make this a prefab. So I'm going to drag it down to my prefab folder. That way I can bring it into other scenes if I need to, or just have a template of it. Perfect. All right, so why don't we look at some canvas settings. Over here in the inspector, you'll see a few settings that we might have to consider. I prefer to keep it a screen space overlay, and I prefer my scale factor to scale with screen. But you can experiment and see what works best for your game, but these settings should get you, pretty there. All right. So what we're going to do now is actually create our message graphics that pop up when we get close to a door. So the trick is when we get close to this door, then our exit controller will take over. So the player will be in this little tiny part of it. Maybe I'll give it a little bit more room. And when they walk inside of it, we want a message to pop up with instructions on how to exit the room. All right, so that's our goal. So inside of my UI manager, I'm going to create a UI, and why don't we start with just an image, give a background to my UI. So to position this, what we need to do are two things. We can click in the 2D view of our scene, and there we can see a nice big outline of our canvas or our image rather. And then what we need to do to make sure we can see our UI parts is go to our layers and just reveal our UI. Perfect. And now we can zoom out quite a bit. But now we can see our image, and it starts out as just a white square. But if I go to my textures folder, I imported this scroll texture, and then I made sure it was set as a sprite, and I got this font. So I got some assets already loaded. So you can go get your own font and your own background images and maybe beat back up here. So I'm just going to drag and drop my background scroll right there, and then using my rect tool, not my scale or move or rotate, but my rect tool, it allows me to work with 2D graphics a little bit more easily. And I'm just going to make sure that it's right at the center of the grid, and I'll probably need to scale it a little bit. I think we can get a good message to fit on that. And I'm going to put it kind of towards the bottom of the screen. All right. And I'm going to say that this is exit background. All right. And then I'm going to right click and we're going to make a text object. All right. So the order in which you stacked your UI elements basically dictates what gets drawn over what. So if my text was parented before my background, then my background would be drawn over my text. So be careful about that. All right, so I'm going to keep my text over my background. I'm going to center it right there. Why don't we make it big so we can get the bigger font on here? And, we got this new text written in there, not the best thing to see. So I'm going to go ahead and set some font settings. 40 might be too big, huh? Let's try 20 for now. And I'm going to make sure that I'm right in the middle here. And I'm going to change my font by just going down to my textures folder and grabbing the font that I just basically imported into Unity. I can drag and drop that onto the font option right here. Notice how it was Arial, now I have Old English. And why don't we go ahead in our text field right here, type in what we want our player to see when they get close to the door. So I'm going to say something like press E to exit the room. All right, cool. So why don't I zoom out and see how that looks? Game view right there would be good. Maybe I'm going to have to bring this in so it doesn't bleed past the scroll part here. Not bad. And I'm going to go in and make the font a little bit blacker. And maybe I can get away with 25. Ooh, that looks pretty good. Nice. All right. So I basically have my text message. Press E to exit the room. All right. So what we want to do now is package these two elements into a single game object that will be able to control an on and off for. As you can see, my UI nicely scales, so that's looking pretty good. So let's just create an empty game object. We've been creating a lot of those, but we're going to call this one like exit room message. We're going to parent it under my canvas. Let me zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to take my background. Let me rename this to exit text. I'm going to take my background and text and parent those like so. And now I have a game object that I can just enable and disable depending on when I want to see my UI messages. So that's basically what we're going to do. We're just going to turn this little empty game object on and off. All right, great. So now that we got our canvas made, why don't we actually get into the scripting? All right, cool. I'm going to go to my scripts folder and we're going to make a new script, a new class. We're going to go to create C# script. We're going to call this UI manager. All right. So there's my previous two scripts from the last video. So UI manager. Why don't we just go ahead and delete everything in here and then we'll go over what code we need. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to attach my UI manager to my UI manager object. So now I have my script at play and all the code I do will take place. All right, what I'm going to do is go ahead and set up my UI manager as a singleton, just like I did with my game manager. And I'm just simply going to copy and paste this private awake because it's literally the same kind of logic. But to get it to work, we have to say something like, let me get a refresher on what we say. Public static, there we go. We make a public static variable of type this class called UI manager. And why don't we call it instance? Perfect, and that'll take care of those errors right here that we had. So again, this makes sure that we don't destroy our UI manager object when we load between scenes, and we destroy any other object that's called UI manager. So we only make sure we have one UI manager at all times. That's the singleton logic right there. All right, great. So what we need to do now is create another variable, and this is going to hold our message we just made. Public, and it's going to be just a straight up game object, and let's just call it exit message. exit room message. We'll be a little bit more descriptive. Why not? And what we're going to do is we'll save. And I'm going to go ahead and assign that public variable exit room message right here in our inspector. We're going to go ahead and assign this our message that we made. So don't forget to assign this public variable the object, because we're literally going to be turning that object on and off. All right, perfect. Let's get back into the code, and let's make a few functions on what we need to do here. I'm going to create 3 functions. I want to make them public so I can access them anywhere in my code with my public static setup I have here. So we're going to make a public show exit message. All right. Public void. Don't forget that void. We're saying that we're not returning any kind of value, so this function is void of all value returns. We're just trying to do something. We're not trying to figure out a value. And then we'll do a public void hide exit message. And I'll save the 3rd function. Oh, careful of that syntax. All right, so what we want to do in these functions is just do a set active. So we'll say exit room message dot set active true when we want to show it. And I'm just going to copy and paste this. And guess what? I'm going to say false when we want to hide it. All right, perfect. Now we can call these 2 public functions from anywhere in our code. So pretty good. And that's the basis of our UI manager script. All right, so what we got to do next is we got to call these functions in our exit controller, because our exit controller is what detects where the player is. So we already kind of have it set up halfway there with an on trigger stay. So what we want to do before we even get into the player pressing buttons or anything like that, we're going to just say whenever, I guess, if other.game object dot compare tag. And yeah, we're being a little redundant here, but we want to make sure that only our player is the thing that spawns this message showing up. And we'll say UI manager dot instance dot show exit message parentheses. And that's going to allow us to call up our function that we made over in our UI. That's going to set our message active and show it on the screen. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create another private function. We'll say private void on trigger exit. And you guessed it, what we're going to do on this one is anytime, let's say if other dot, let's see, game object dot compare tag, and then yeah, it'll be a player again. So again, if any object with a tag of player leaves this collider, then we'll call on our another public function, our UI manager, called hide exit message. All right, so let's save it, and I think that should be what we need to get going. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let it compile. Why don't we go ahead and hide our exit message, because that's kind of the state we want it to begin in. I want to make this a little bit bigger. We'll press play. So you can see I'm put into my scene. When we get close, the message appears. When we back off, it doesn't. So that's pretty cool. So let's load a scene. You'll see that my message still appears. But if I enter a collider and then back out, it goes away. So we need to fix that. So what we have to do is make that 3rd function I was talking about earlier in our UI manager. And we probably need a public void saying hide all messages. So we might have other messages in the future. In fact, I'm pretty sure we will, like unlock door or something like that. We might just need a way where we can turn off all UI messages in our scene. So we're going to say exit room message dot set active false. So that kind of seems redundant. But I'm going to make a comment here saying more messages to hide coming soon. And if that doesn't pan out, I can always just get rid of this function and kind of go in and just use the hide exit message. No big deal, but I'm trying to kind of plan ahead for the future. I might need that function. And then what we'll do in our GM is anytime that we load into a scene, so right after the line of code where we load in, let me zoom in right there. What we want to do is say UI manager instance hide all messages. So after we immediately load a scene, we immediately hide all of our UI messages. So why don't we test it? So we get our normal. I load into the scene and boom, there we are. UI message instantly disappeared. And, you know, the player experience is improved. And there we go. So that's how we can get a basic UI going in our game. We'll continue to add to its functionality as we add more of our mechanics to our level. All right. Thanks, guys.